Hello, hello. Happy Saturday. It's been a while since we've done like a self-healing Saturday video. And so that's what we wanted to do today. And we had a really great question from someone who is in a difficult healing situation, which is great to talk through for everyone to benefit from, because it's a really real situation. You know, she's got multiple conflicts that have been active and then in healing, and she's feeling frustrated and disappointed and feeling like it's so complex that it seems impossible or insurmountable to be able to, find all of these conflicts, respond resourcefully to the healing state, respond in a way that doesn't reactivate more conflicts. And that's a really real situation, because as a biological special program goes through its course, if you continually are having other conflicts, it just makes it kind of more difficult and confusing to find your way out of it. But we wanted to talk about that feeling of disappointment itself. Because when you find yourself there, it's like you can't even go to work on all of the different conflicts that may be going on if the first thing that you're experiencing is like this heavy feeling of disappointment and impossibility. Like, is this even going to be possible for me to resolve these conflicts, to get to the point that I want to be? Because if you can't believe that there is a way for you to get from where you are to where you want to be, it's kind of like, what's the point in even trying? You can kind of get to that point of desperation, of frustration, of just like, is this even worth going after? And so we wanted to talk about what you can do when you find yourself in that state of frustration, and ways to look at your circumstance that will allow you to at least get to that point where you believe it's possible to get the outcome, the results that you want to get. I'm going to share this.
Okay, one thing that's really, first of all, just on the subject of expectation, because I see some less than useful things being said about expectation sometimes. I'll see, or about the relationship between expectation and disappointment. Do you know what I mean? Like this whole thing that they didn't let you down, your expectations let you down, and all this different stuff. And this to me, and essentially the admonishment in the spiritual community, the personal growth community, very often is just don't have any expectations, and then you won't ever be disappointed. It's basically your fault because, see, you did a sin, you did a no-no, you did a bad thing, which was that you expected something, and that's why you're upset. And this to me is really stupid. It reminds me of doctors, right? And it doesn't matter what kind of doctor that they are. You come into the doctor, and let's say that your work involves lifting your hands over your head, or maybe you're an athlete, or maybe you're just a human being that wants to be able to move your arm around, and you say, "Doctor, it hurts when I do this." And the doctor says, "Oh, just don't do that." See, this is to me when someone comes, someone asks for help because they're feeling disappointed, and then some person says, "Well, you're feeling disappointed because you had expectations, so just don't do expectations." When holding expectations resourcefully, when interacting with expectations in a conscious way, has the capacity to immensely enrich one's experience. Like for me, I mean, the capacity to put my arm overhead, I love pressing things, I love doing exercises, and the ability just kind of like as a physical being to move my arm in a way that my arm is obviously supposed to move without experiencing pain is an inherently enriching thing. And the fact that I'm experiencing pain while doing something that I ought to be able to do doesn't mean that I just shouldn't do that thing. It means that there's something going wrong, or there's something a little bit off, or there's something that I need to fix, so that I can do these natural and normal things in a way that doesn't cause pain and introduces pleasure and fulfillment and enjoyment into my life. And I find very often when a practitioner, whether they're a physical doctor or they're a coach or whatever, when a practitioner's skill set does not enable them to help a person be able to do what they want to do in a way that doesn't cause them pain, whether it's physical or emotional or whatever, the inclination, rather than just saying, "Gosh, I don't know what to do," nobody wants to say that for some reason. What they like to say instead is, "Oh, just don't do that thing." There must be something inherently bad about lifting your arm overhead. There must be something inherently bad about holding expectations or desires or being attached to things. There must be something intrinsically wrong with that. So simply just don't do that, because I don't have the skill set necessary to teach you how to do that successfully. I'll just suggest you not do it at all. That kind of makes me a little upset, because think about how normal, how natural it is for you to expect things to go a certain way, or for you to want things to go a certain way, or to have a hope that things are going to go a certain way. And think about, if you excise that, if you make that something that you should not do, if you make that something that's wrong to do, or if you avoid that because you're afraid of the consequences of doing it in a way that maybe doesn't serve you, look at the opportunity cost in that. Look at the capacity to create outcomes that you want in life that you're going to sacrifice. You know what I'm saying? This is like this whole idea that you shouldn't use a sword, because if you grab the sword by the blade, you might hurt yourself. Do you know what I'm saying? You shouldn't use a hammer, because if you don't pay attention to what you're doing, you might smash your thumb or break a window. It's like, well, what if we learned how to do those things consciously and intentionally and in ways that work? Do you know what I mean? Well, then, we could create really, really wonderful outcomes. And so one of the big things for me about this whole, like, I'm experiencing disappointment. Well, what were you doing? Well, I thought things were going to go this way and they didn't. Well, just don't, they want things to go any certain way. That to me is not a very sophisticated solution to the problem. And it's, and it is, to me, it is symptomatic of people moving away from pain rather than recognizing that it's possible to not know what you're missing. Rather than, we're failing to recognize that this isn't just about getting rid of the pain we're not experiencing or we are experiencing. It's also about getting a hold of and tapping into the ecstasy and the wonderful feelings and the power to consciously create what we want that we aren't experiencing right now. You know what I mean? And I think that when you start thinking in those terms, rather than saying, I want to do this, but I start saying, I want to do this and. I want to have expectations, and I want to be able to want my life to go a certain way, and I want to be flexible enough to not experience suffering and resistance and pain if and when things don't go quite the way I want them to. I want the ability to plan how I want my life to go, and I want to be able to respond resourcefully when life goes some way other than what I was planning. I want both of those things, and I'm not willing to settle for one or the other. So that's just a little bit of a kind of a diatribe there on this whole, oh, you got disappointed because you had an expectation? Well, just get rid of all your expectations. I say, well, maybe turn the expectations around. You know what I'm saying? Maybe build in some additional skill sets. Maybe learn how to do some extra things so that you can really handle those things resourcefully. So you want to get into the specific situation?
Yeah, just on that note too, it just does make me think of when we were watching Breaking Bad, and one of the things said to Walter White when he was diagnosed with lung cancer was the whole manage your expectations. Like, and what that meant was, don't hope too big. don't really think that you're going to get totally better. Managing your expectations is a really kind of dismal I think, thing to recommend to someone. Don't expect yourself to fully heal, to actually get through this, and as though you could get your hopes up too high and then be disappointed. The thing is, and especially when you understand GNM and the 5 biological laws, you know that there is a way to get out of the situation. There is, the body is engaging in this healing process. And if a conflict is resolved and not reactivated, it will not persist. It does have an end date. It's got there's a set amount of time that the body has to heal. And if it's been ongoing for years and years and years, it's understandable that it will take quite a bit of time for the body to do the restoration process. And it will be challenging for you to respond to your plethora of symptoms in a way that doesn't reactivate the initial conflict. But knowing that there is a path, knowing that there is a way, having that expectation that, it's going to take a lot, but I believe, this game is solvable. It's not something that it just can't be fixed, can't be solved. I'm too far gone. It's too advanced. It's just too much. Your belief that it's possible and your willingness to kind of, play the game each day and respond as best as you can, given the resources that are available to you. And then have that confidence that you're going to be improving each day. That's really what it takes to kind of go through this journey, because, what's the alternative too? Is like, do I want the alternative, which is what? To throw in the towel, to get rid of my expectations, to not hope that things are going to get any better. And just from me, I would choose the difficulty of like, okay, let me take on this challenge. How can I think differently today? How can I respond to really blaring invitations to feel bad about myself, to devalue myself, to, tell myself how bad my situation is, how stuck I am, how much this sucks. it's going to be really easy to say that to myself because I've got a lot of mental pathways, a lot of neurological tracks that go back to that same thought, flare up that same old conflict. There's like imprinting in my brain, and it's just very easy. But I know that I am bigger than this problem. And it's kind of building that confidence and building that apparatus within yourself that you know that you can do it, even when it seems hard, even if, even on the days when it seems impossible. There are ways that you can look at that impossibility that will give you that spark, that kind of vigor, that audacity to still keep going for it.
It's interesting. The whole manage your expectations almost always is sort of a euphemism for diminish your expectations. When someone says manage your expectations, no one ever says that to someone who seems to be a little bit down, saying, "Oh, we need to amplify your expectations." I don't think I've ever heard that term used, and I think that that points to one of these notions that kind of like with the whole thing we talked about before. Not all doctors are competent healers or people helpers, and of course, not all competent healers and people helpers are necessarily doctors. If you go to a doctor, what basically is that person's gone through a certain course of training that involves mostly if this, then this. It's kind of an algorithmic sort of standard of care treatment pattern, depending on the type of practitioner you're seeing. Like I know, for example, in chiropractic, there's a whole lot of different schools of thought about what you're supposed to do. Some of them make more sense than others. And pretty much for us, the thing we were taught was if a person does this, you must then do these things. You must refer out. If that's not happening, you pretty much you're good to do your thing, whatever your thing happens to be. Here's a couple of red flag situations, and you must do those things, right? And so I think recognizing that, I think that a healer and a people helper is a person, that's something that operates at a number of different levels. It's not just what I prescribe to you. It's what I'm conscious of when I'm interacting with you. It's how I'm seeing you. It's how I'm engaging with you. It's what I'm envisioning for you. It's what I'm encouraging you to envision for yourself. There's all sorts of levels, I think, where standard of care is not established at all. Do you know what I'm saying? And recognizing that when you go in and when you interact with people, that because they are competent in one area, it doesn't necessarily mean they're competent in other areas. So for example, they might know what to say to you, they don't know how to say it. And they may not recognize that how they say it's really important. And one of the kind of presuppositions that I find is just so unhelpful and also untrue about this whole managing expectations thing. And I think it applies to what we talked about before about having no expectations. There tends to be this assumption that when it comes to creating outcomes in reality out here, that expectations are fundamentally inert, which means pretty much stuff out here is going to go the way it's going to go. And it doesn't really matter whether you expect things to go the way they're going to go or not. They're going to go the way they're going to go. And your expectations are either going to make you feel bad when it goes that way or not. You know what I'm saying? And I think that assumption that a person's expectations are in no way influential in through a number of different channels in what that person's outcomes become, how they think, how they feel, how they behave. In the most kind of mechanistic, reductionistic way, that those things don't matter is totally crazy. Do you know what I'm saying? It is, I'm leaving a resource out. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like, I don't know if I'm going to have enough fuel to get to my destination. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to withhold 25% of the fuel I have available to me. I'm going to do my behaviors and I'm going to do the things the doctor tells me to do, but I'm not really going to expect a great outcome. That's like saying, well, if I put all the fuel in my tank, I might not reach my destination. So I think what I'll do to avoid disappointment is that I'll leave 25% of the fuel that I do have out. You don't have to worry about thinking you can do things that aren't actually impossible, because if there is something that actually is impossible to do, you just won't do it. You know what I'm saying? And so you might as well assume that you can do those things in order to maximally achieve your ability to do all of the things that are possible. Because I think that let's say that there's a huge circle, and this huge circle is all the things that are possible. And then there's a little circle, tiny circle on the inside that's like 1/10 the size of the possible circle. That's what we think is possible. And then there's this 90% zone out here that is impossible because we assume that it is. These are things that could be accessible to us, but they aren't because we can't imagine that they are. And that really plays into the importance of, what you might call it functional possibility. Because if there is something that's functionally possible for me, which means, or theoretically possible, I could do that thing. But if I can't imagine that that's possible, it becomes impossible for me to motivate myself to do the things that would allow me to achieve this thing that is possible. So the theoretically possible becomes functionally impossible because my inability to believe in it, right? Or my inability of my practitioner to believe in it makes me incapable of believing it, which makes me incapable of achieving that thing kind of in reality. And so it's starting to think of it.
We have a graphic actually for that.
Yeah, I think
so I'll share that graphic. I'll find a screenshot of it and share it in the comments so you can see what that's like, because that's so true. Is that because we don't believe something's possible, it becomes impossible for us, although it is within the realm of possibility. Physically, I mean, it could be possible for us, but if you don't believe that it is, if you're not willing to think that it is possible, then functionally it does become impossible for you.
Yeah, and so I think one of the things you're kind of getting back to segueing, because this is like kind of general principles that sort of frame this thing. It's just because it's really important, because this is a huge, this speaks to kind of like how, just very kind of deep patterns that we have in terms of how we relate to our reality and how we relate to things that we want to accomplish and what we do in response to confronting certain things like seeming impossibility, like difficulty, like what you might call invitation to be disappointed or whatever. And it's at a very deep pattern level of information processing. And so it's kind of tough to talk about, because what will happen is I'll tend to respond in a certain way to different things that happen in my life, but it's the same pattern manifesting itself in different kind of content situations. And so one general principle to kind of begin to frame this thing, and we'll also kind of bring it down to the specific situation, is to recognize or simply ponder the possibility that impossibility is an experience. It's not a reality. Fundamentally, impossibility is an experience, not a reality. Because one thing that I tend to do when I'm interacting with something and I'm trying to get it to work a certain way, and it's not, whether it's, like you said, like resolving a conflict, getting out of these kind of like recursive patterns of thinking. I can't because I believe I can't, and I can't believe I can because it looks like I can't, and it looks like I can't because I believe that I can't, and so I can't, and you know, like, when you get stuck in that stuff, it helps a lot. Rather than trying to go against the grain, step outside and notice the direction that the grain is going, and then see, that's really interesting. Extricate yourself from that experience before you attempt to do work on it, which is to say, like, literally, people will sometimes say, I have a problem I need to get some distance from. And what they're saying to you, literally, they're describing to you, is that I am associated into my negative experience. And what I need to do is dissociate from it. I'm like this, and I'm so in the weeds that I can't see the forest for the trees. What I need to do is visually, I need to step back from what's going on so that I can see myself doing what doesn't work, so I can see what doesn't work and what it looks like for me to be doing it. You know what I mean? And so when you begin to realize that, you say, okay, well, if I'm trying to do something out here and it isn't working, I'll start to say this is impossible. And what my inclination is naturally is to assume that the impossibility is inherent to the situation. It's inherent to the goal that I'm attempting to accomplish. It is a fundamental, unchanging, static aspect or characteristic or trait of the reality upon which I'm attempting to do work and which I'm trying to change. What I tend to overlook is the fact that what I'm referring to as impossibility and attributing to the world that exists outside of me, it's actually an experience that exists within me. And it's an experience that I create as a result of certain things I'm doing outside of my awareness. It's not on the stage of consciousness. It's way off to the side. It's this whole pay no attention to the man behind the curtain kind of thing. I'm looking at the big Wizard of Oz up here, which is big, intimidating, scary reality. And I'm overlooking the fact that there's a little ridiculous man in a stupid outfit hiding behind a curtain, pulling levers, making this big thing look as big as it is. Those are those patterns that aren't really serving us. Those are those patterns that I have of interacting with reality that cause reality to be this, this huge kind of insurmountable thing. And so that's a general principle. When I encounter impossibility in my world, rather than assuming, and this is something too that if you don't know you're doing this, probably, but if you look at it, you'll start to notice, because this is the whole idea, is that you start to notice things that seem like they just were, and you start to recognize, oh wait, those are things that I was doing. That impossibility lives in here, it doesn't live out here. Reality is very willing to acclimate itself. Reality does things that reality is not supposed to do all the time. So impossibility and these kind of rigid conceptualizations of the way things have to be, those are things that kind of tend to exist within our mind, because it's really interesting for now. It's like, if you think about something like Newtonian physics, right? It works really well up until a certain point, up until you reach about Einstein. And then all of a sudden, all of that stuff that Newton said, all of those laws, right? These are absolute laws that are supposed to be immutable and unchangeable. They are, until you start dealing with Einstein stuff, and then they fall apart. They no longer explain all the They no longer explain all the things that are happening. Someone must have been walking down the street 10 blocks away. And so you recognize that reality is willing to contradict itself all of the time. Reality is constantly doing things it's not supposed to be doing, like the dog in there is barking. And when you recognize that, you start thinking, oh, this isn't that big. So this sensation of impossibility, I'm being stuck between a rock and a hard place is really being stuck between what I want and what I can't believe is possible. It has nothing to do with anything that's going on out here. These things, when I go like this, it's not me going like this with out here, it's me going like this with something inside of myself. There's an incompatibility in my mind, right? And so when I start to look at that, first of all, it's just kind of a relief to me, because it's like, oh, this sensation, this frustration, all of this that I'm dealing with here, my entire perception of this impossibility, the meanings that I'm assigning to it, the bad feelings that are being created within me, the hopelessness, the frustration, the futility, none of this stuff is particularly real. I mean, it's real to me right now because I'm creating it, but it's not fundamental or intrinsic, or it's not derivative of some kind of hard fact of my reality. It's indicative of a particular way in which I have been interacting with that reality. Things I've been telling myself these things mean, things that I've been saying must not be the way that they are, things that I'm saying about myself that must now be different than they are, me telling myself a story that says I must know more than I do in order to do the things that I must do in order to have the things that I want, and I can't, so I can't. You know what I mean? That is where that kind of grating sensation is coming from. And as you begin to recognize it's coming from you, or even as you just begin to consider it's coming from you in advance of being able to recognize how exactly you're doing it, you start to relax. And that relaxation is really the most valuable thing, because you say, what if all of these problems that I think I have, what if the kind of this double bind sensation that I'm experiencing right now, what if this isn't really how it is? What if this is just the result of how I'm looking at it? And what if there's a different way that I can look at all of this that will actually literally create a change in my experience of the situation? You want to be careful here, because sometimes people will hear me saying, well, I can see it differently than you can. So what's your problem? It's no problem. What I'm actually talking about deconstructing your experience of impossibility, not you listening to me or somebody else and saying, well, they said it was possible, so I'm just going to try to ignore this crushing feeling of impossibility. No, we're talking about actually taking that apart and replacing it with something different by building kind of your own personal experiential reference points for noticing how a lot of the elements of your experience of this present stuff that you're dealing with that you don't like, the elements of it that aren't serving you, the elements of it that are holding you back, the things that make you just want to quit and give up, recognizing for yourself how so much of those things are coming from you. And when you recognize that those things are coming from you, it's not coming from something intrinsic about who you are. So there's nothing wrong with you. It's coming from things that you're doing because you don't realize you're doing them, because it seems like those things are just happening because they're being done outside of awareness. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like if I were riding a bicycle in a way that was causing me to constantly fall over, pretty soon I'd start to think there's a law of the universe. There's something about physics that makes it inevitable that I'm going to fall off this bicycle. I'm so frustrated. I'm so angry. Everyone has internal criteria for how many times they're going to try something before they get frustrated, and they have a certain amount of time that they're willing to be frustrated, or a certain amount of intensity of frustration before they decide it's impossible, and they've got a certain amount of time trying to do something they decide it's impossible before it is that they give up and quit. And when you recognize all of that stuff, you can kind of transcend it. You're no longer bound by your internal criteria if those things aren't serving you. So if I'm riding a bicycle and I'm constantly leaning over to the right in a way that's making me fall down, if I do that like 1,000 times before somebody shows up and offers me a new way of riding a bicycle, you can understand how I could begin to believe in the inevitability of falling over and in the impossibility of standing up. Now, if I were to begin to believe 100% in the inevitability of falling over and in the impossibility of standing up, would that mean that the physics of this universe would not accommodate my riding a bicycle successfully? Of course it wouldn't mean that. Of course it would be possible, whether I believed it or not. The trick then is, how do I transcend my conviction that because I haven't found a way to do it yet, no way exists? How do I get out of that? Because I'm not constrained by what's possible. I'm constrained by what my kind of unconscious criteria will allow me to think is possible and feel is possible and experience as possible. And I mean, you don't even have to get done with that project before you begin deriving benefit from it, because you recognize, oh, wait, there's all these unseen levers and buttons within myself that I can push and pull and rotate and turn and all this different stuff and different orders. And there's, we can guide you in doing that so that you can do it more efficiently. But there's all these possibilities. I'm trying to get this door unlocked to this reality that I want. And I've got like 1,000 different levers that I can pull, and I never know which one is going to open it up for me. Isn't that wonderful? That's not onerous. That's not scary. That's not oppressive. That's a really cool idea that says I'm not stuck with any experience that I happen to be having right now. You know what I mean? And I think that's immensely liberating, because my experience right now could be really rather unpleasant. And if I add into that, here's an unpleasant experience right here, and I add into that unpleasant experience an acute awareness and a powerful conviction that there's nothing about that experience that can't change, and that there's nothing about my reality that can't be changed by changing my experience of it, then the unpleasant experience, then there's a bigger experience around it, which is a wonderful experience of ecstatic empowerment. And then there's a small little pocket within it that's sort of like, oh, I don't really like that too much. But it occurs in the context of an awareness of your ability to transcend and transmute and transform all of it. And so that's kind of like big framing.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this too is kind of getting used to this language. I do find a lot of people will, you kind of give up too soon, because even, some of these concepts and trying to this is a huge mind bender. The way that we discuss reality, the way that we discuss human experience and the things that you can do. I mean, it's a form of mental gymnastics. It does take a lot of, mental flexibility and mental strength. And these moves that you can make to get yourself out of sticky situations. And I do find that some people will get this disappointment feeling very early in the process, and in realizing that awareness and changing your response to, especially physical symptoms, because they're just so right there in your face and they're affecting everything about your experience. The ability to respond differently to these physical symptoms that normally freak you out, normally make you panic, make you depressed, make you angry, make you confused. I mean, all of the intense emotions that you get when you're having symptoms. I understand that it does seem like, okay, this is too complex. There's too much, my situation's too far. And the thing is this process, it is a skill thing. It is a getting used to thinking about things in this new way. And, flexibility, starting to bend, starting to move your mind in these new and different ways. And it's just like a little kid who's learning to ice skate or learning actual gymnastics. It's like you're brand new at this, and it's at first it is really difficult, and there are skills that you have to learn and that take practice. But the thing is when you just start building just one experience of having an invitation to devalue yourself, to feel bad about yourself, to feel stuck, to just basically to reactivate any conflict, to feel separated from the world, to feel isolated, to feel alone. Just one experience of that invitation, that thing happening, that symptom coming up, that strong desire, to wish that you could go to some place that you can't go because of your physical condition. It's like you see one of these invitations and you see it for what it is, and you realize, oh, you know what? In this moment, I do have a choice. I can respond the way I've always responded, or I can respond a different way. And even if you still respond, if your predominant response is still 51%, I feel stuck, angry, upset, I'm devaluing myself, I'm not good enough, all of this. But at least if you saw it, and you at least saw that I could feel differently. Right now I don't. Right now I don't feel like I have access to that better feeling. I still feel bad about myself. I still feel unworthy, not good enough, fill in the blank. But if you could just start expanding just that moment, and and then the next time something comes around, and especially, and that's the thing, is if you've got a lot of conflicts and you've got constant invitations, you've got constant opportunities to respond differently. And it's not all going to unravel at once, especially if there's multiple things going on and multiple healing phases. You've got to take one little thing and choose in that moment to consciously think a better thought, to think a thought of, boosting your self-confidence instead of, feeling bad about yourself. And you can build on that tiny step that almost feels like nothing, that almost feels like this is stupid. But if you can just understand that it's a skill that you can learn, a skill that you can harness, and a skill that will improve upon itself each and every day, you have another experience and another experience. It's like, gosh, yesterday I had that interaction with that person, and I felt really, a desire to resist them and be angry about them. But you know what? I chose to love and forgive them in spite of a million reasons to not do that, because I just knew that it would feel better inside. And I did that. And gosh, that was huge. I've never done that before. And then you just start seeing that you can continually forgive reality for being the way that it is. I can forgive my body for responding this way. I know that it's doing it for a reason. I know that the reason it's doing it is because of past thinking. And I've just decided that I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to try this, changing my response to reality, so that I can break these cycles. And just knowing that the more you try a little bit more and a little bit more, you will learn to ride the bike, to ski, you'll learn the skill that it takes. It's built out of a lot of different components. And if you try to get it all at once, it's like, that is difficult. But if you take just like these little tiny projects, these little tiny opportunities, these little invitations, and choosing a better and different response in that moment, it will be less daunting, and you will get these little wins. And when you get the win, it's like, gosh, I did that. I did that. And that's a reason to boost your self-confidence. And that's kind of like the fuel you need to keep going, is to have an experience and to choose something different in that moment.
Yeah, we got a good thing here. It's mind bending, and I think that's the idea, because I'm glad that you're experiencing that. So it's a flexibility thing, and you unlock, really, I think one of the things that the mind is meant to do is things it hasn't done before. And when you allow that to be okay, because I think so often early life experiences cause us to be uncomfortable with unfamiliar environments, or with learning too much, or with learning out of control. Like when you want to learn kind of at a small pace, but it's like if someone gives you kind of like an intravenous sort of like knowledge infusion, it's almost like you're like, whoa, I haven't evaluated all of this insight for safety. I haven't evaluated all of this new perspective for safety yet. I can't control how much of this is coming in. It's amazing the things that people will have a problem with, even wonderful things, if they're coming in at a level over their threshold. This happens with money. We see this happen. We've seen it happen with us in the past. We've seen it happen in the lives of our clients, where they start doing something and it works so well, they start getting what they want in an amount that almost makes them uncomfortable. It doesn't matter the fact that it is what they want. It's coming in so fast that they feel nervous about it. And I think that when you give your mind permission to just run wild, and you give your mind permission to just dive into the deep end off of the high dive, diving board, into unfamiliar intellectual territory, or into unfamiliar experiential territory, you really allow the mind to do the thing that it's supposed to do, which is things that it has never done before, things that it doesn't feel ready to do. The mind is always ready to do things that it doesn't feel ready to do. And if it's not doing anything it doesn't feel ready to do, it's not doing everything it is ready to do. And when you just kind of let that kind of go and flow, you start to really tap into your power, and you start to recognize that, like, man, I remember when I first went skiing, it was like, I could go a lot faster. My skill set, my brain could allow me to ski downhill a lot faster than my conscious mind was comfortable with me doing. I was not comfortable with my own skill set, and it took several days of the vacation before, and probably hundreds of trips down the mountain, before the me I experienced myself to be became comfortable with the skill set and the ability of the whole of who I was. You know what I'm saying? And when those two matched up, I went straight down the mountain. I was like flying down the mountain, and I never fell one time. Because I could just do it. And when you recognize the things that you're capable of, you start doing the things that you're capable of, and then that changes sort of like what you realize and are able to believe you're capable. Well, wow, if I was capable of doing all of this when I believed I wasn't capable of doing much of anything, I wonder what I'm capable of doing now that those experiences have caused me to believe that I might be capable of more than it seems like I am. That's an interesting thing, and it really is that unfolding, and it really is that mind bendingness. And you want to bend the mind, and then you want to take that sort of bent and folded mind into these new experiences, and just watch these little tiny subtle differences. You know what I mean? Because it's like, it seems like you said, things that seem like nothing. I responded slightly differently to that stimulus, or I responded differently when that memory came up, or whatever. And it seems like absolutely nothing until you understand kind of like the miracle of compounding interest. And, everyone's heard the story about how if you would have started saving when you were 17, but, you'd have $2 million. That kind of thing happens with our thoughts too, with our mental money, which, some mystics call the coin of heaven. And it's because it seems such a small thing to have slightly improved my experience of being physically unwell today, that I tend to just dismiss it and to not put another penny in the bank. Do you know what I mean? That there aren't that many in there. But if I recognize the value of each individual one, and that the point of the first change in perspective that I form is not changing that perspective, it's making it easier to change my perspective again. Recognizing that, you go out and you do one repetition with the weight and you say, what's the point of that? And people quit. Well, the point of the first rep is to make it possible to do the second, third, and fourth, and then you can make that out. The whole point of the first workout, the workout sucked and I wasn't any good at it and I hardly was able to do anything, but having done workout 1 makes workout 2 a possibility. Do you know what I'm saying? And when you recognize that in workout 3, now I just go out and do my day's activity. And I don't worry about whether or not it's going to be worthwhile, because if it isn't, it's going to lead to something that is. And perhaps doing something that seems not worthwhile is the prerequisite to moving forward to something that does. And when you were talking about it being weird to talk about reality in this way, I was thinking about that and sort of like feeling overwhelmed, feeling frustrated, feeling confused, feeling kind of like, my mind is bending. That's not a commentary on what you're capable of. It's just a commentary on what you're used to. And you have to understand that. If you're feeling intimidated, if you're feeling frustrated, if you're feeling worried, concerned, if you're feeling like this is too much for you, watch the meanings that you assign to this stuff. That doesn't mean that we are at the edge of what you are capable of. It means we're at the edge of what you're used to, comfortable with, what you're familiar with. That's all that means. And when you change the meaning that you assign to that feeling of uncertainty or to that feeling of confusion or overwhelm or whatever, and you say, this doesn't mean that I have reached the limit of what I'm capable of. It means I've reached the limit of what I've done before. The experience of frustration or overwhelm or confusion or uncertainty or like stuff up in the air becomes a much more powerfully positive one. And I would just encourage you to embrace that uncertainty. I mean, we talk fast. Well, I talk fast and I talk a lot. And sometimes people say, whoa, slow down. I want to process that. And I say, no. You don't need to process it. What I want to do is I want to get in your mind and I want to stir all this stuff up in the air. Because when you stir it all up in the air, what happens is it has an opportunity to reconfigure itself and rearrange. And that is what allows one of the most precious and sacred moments in the personal growth journey to occur, which is the what moment?
The aha moment.
Yeah, I call it the kerplunk moment, because you stir all this stuff up in the air and it moves around in a different way, and then it kerplunks into place in a new and different way, and then you have that, now I see it, And I don't know if anyone in here played Mario growing up, or maybe you were already grown up, I don't know, but like Mario 1, Mario 2, Mario 3, pretty much the same. You know what I mean? Like the graphics improved, the map was a little different, but it was this two-dimensional realm. There was one thing that Mario 1, 2, and 3 all had in common. You scrolled across the screen in this kind of two-dimensional world. And it didn't matter how much things were different. Well, I changed my thinking. Well, I did try to change my diet. I changed my behavior. I did these different things differently. It's like, well, yeah, that's Mario 3 versus Mario 2. And it's a little different, maybe a little more interesting in all this, but it's still 2D Mario. Then you play Mario 64. Anyone remember the first time you played Super Mario 64, which was the one that was three-dimensional, and they had to have like a little tutorial to tell you how to move the camera around, because you could control the camera and the guy in 3 dimensions instead of scrolling across the screen? At first it was confusing. At first it was disorienting. At first it was intimidating. At first it was kind of like, whoa, this doesn't even seem like Mario. That's how life works when we do it this way. What we say is, listen, you've been scrolling across the screen this way, and pretty much like some worlds you liked and some you didn't, and some had a scary dragon at the end of it, and some was all lava and fireballs and big bullets and stuff like that. But you pretty much only had one direction that you could move. You couldn't even, it was 2D, but you only had one of the Ds that you could move. You were only heading in one direction only, and you couldn't even turn around. Now you live in a world where you can go in any direction. This world now has depth to it. You can move this way and you can move back this way. You can move forward and backwards. You can move up and down. And not only that, you can actually control the perspective, right? You can control the camera, which is that you can control how you're seeing what you're doing and how you're seeing where you are and how you're seeing who you are and how you're seeing all that different stuff. You can spin it around and see it in different perspectives, and you can even hit the replay button. There's all of these wonderful features that it's going to take you a while to figure out how to do, but that really is just a commentary on what you're capable of and the power and the options that you have. And so this increased personal power, this increased optionality, this increased agency in your life in the beginning feels disorienting because you have so many wonderful things that you're capable of. And I think it's when you just kind of like let yourself play with it and play with the camera, move the perspective around. I mean, we're talking about specific things like actually shift the orientation of your thoughts and how you're viewing your life and your timeline and all this different stuff. But just in general, I'm looking at a thing and it looks impossible. Probably that means that's not a cue for me to quit. It's a cue for me to turn it around. It's a cue for me to rotate the camera, to change the perspective, because I can't see what I need to see right now, which is possibility and how I can do this thing I want to do. That doesn't mean that I need just to pack it all in and say, forget it. That is a cue to say, time to rotate the camera, time to move the camera around. Where was the buttons to do that? God, I don't really remember. Okay, but then you get used to it. You find those buttons, you find those levers, you start pushing them. But it's that patience with yourself, and it's that recognition that the weight that you feel upon yourself is not all of the stuff that you must change and can't. It's all of the things that can be changed by you and can be optimized by you and can be created, right, by you. It's optionality really that is weighing us down, because there's so many wonderful things for us to do. And when you start to become aware of that, you start saying, God, I got a big pile of really awesome stuff that I'm going to do in this life. I guess I better just start getting started somewhere. Do you know what I mean? I just need to start getting started on somewhere, something. Just do something and start moving in that direction. And you'll notice that what's happening here is we haven't even done work on the problem. Do you know what I'm saying? We're doing work on my perception of the problem as a problem, which actually is the real problem. The stuff out here is just a project. That's all. The problems don't exist in reality. Problems only exist in perception. Problems only exist within us. The only thing that exists out here are projects, which are things that are this way and could be this way, and the steps that we go from being what is to what can be. It's just realizing those preferences. And when you recognize that, you start, and that's actually kind of the interesting thing, is that problems that seem impossible to solve, it's because we're looking out here and thinking that the problems are out here or in our past or something like that, when reality is that the problems are always inside. The problem is not my past. The problem is my present moment pattern of interacting with my past, assigning meanings to my past, perceiving my past, feeling my past, responding to, resisting, suffering over those feelings. It's always going on now. And that's why it's impossible to solve the problem out there, because it doesn't exist. The problem exists inside, and it's basically what is the apparatus out of which my perception and experience of this thing as a problem, what is that made out of? How am I managing to perceive this as an insoluble double bind? How am I managing to create that within myself? And that's not like an accusatory thing. It's not like a feel guilty or feel bad about it thing. And if you start doing that, well, then you just notice that and you say, how am I feeling that guilt? How am I doing that? You recognize that it's just a process. You go to work on that stuff, start deconstructing it and unraveling it. You literally, rather than trying to change things that are impossible, you really can't. I mean, there are things that are impossible to do while you're perceiving them as impossible. So what you want to do first is you want to go to work on the perception of impossibility, deconstruct that, and once that's gone, you'll find that a lot of the things that actually were literally impossible are no longer impossible, because you have removed the perception of impossibility. You want to say anything?
I mean, that is just all so good.
Sometimes I have to take a breath and just say,
Take a breath, you're okay. And it's at first just that desire is like, gosh, there's so much I need to change. And when you start noticing your thoughts, and it's just like, for the people that did the awareness challenge, this is like a big thing that comes up. It's like, oh my gosh, there's just so many bad thoughts that I'm having. How do I even begin to change this? And it can feel like, oh my gosh, I am just a lost cause, because every thought that I'm observing is negative, is self-devaluation, it's, conflict city there. And so that's why really we don't ask you to change anything, as far as like our instructing on how to start this process. Is just to watch, just watch how you're doing what you're already doing, because you haven't been watching it. It's just been happening. And when you just build that part of yourself that just has a little bit of distance between the heaviness, the intensity of your experience, and there's just a part of you that is able to say, okay, that's me having an experience. Okay, I just thought these things. I feel this way about myself. My body's in the situation that it is. I'm starting to understand from the GNM perspective that everything that's going on with me is a result of a conflict, whether the active conflict going on right now or the resolution, reconstruction phase. And I'm starting to see that. I'm starting to see that the way I'm feeling emotionally, the way I'm feeling physically, it's the result of things that have gone on in my experience. And now I'm just at this, I'm in this baby step of figuring out how I can start seeing how I actively do. How do I do self-devaluation? How do I do feeling stuck in life? How do I do feeling separated? How do I do, feeling angry? And when I'm able to see myself doing things, I'm going to see the thoughts, a series of thoughts that it takes for me to create this experience. And believe me, when I first started doing this, it was like, I don't know what I was thinking. Like trying to get a hold of my thought was just like trying to grab like a live slimy fish who's just trying to get away from you. It's like, I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know what that's doing. I don't know any, and I truly felt like I felt that feeling of this is probably impossible. And the thing that started this whole thing for me was, relationship patterns and things I told Steve. I'm like, I'm just the way that I am, and a lot of times we'll feel like, okay, I guess I'm just the way that I am. I think the way that I think. I have the problems that I have, that's just me. I had become so identified with my negative patterns, my dysfunction, my issues that it was like, I can't change this stuff. This is who I am. This is my personality. It was kind of like, I told him, take it or leave it. It's just, this is me. But
sounds like a challenge to me.
Well, and so when I started understanding that everything about what it's like to be me, it's a process that I'm engaging in. And if I want different results, there is a way for me to change it. So whether it's an aspect of your personality, a pattern of conflict, how you respond to symptoms, all of that stuff, like you said, it's just like I'm used to something. I'm inclined to feel certain ways because of the, the momentum of having felt that way in the past. It makes perfect sense that it's really easy for me to devalue myself, feel unworthy, feel stuck in life, feel just horrible about my situation. It's so easy to think that. But if I can just start watching myself have these thoughts and start connecting the dots between those thoughts I'm thinking and realizing that those thoughts are communication to my entire body. My cells are listening. My body has this, this ancient language that it speaks. And if I say, I feel bad about myself, I feel stuck in life, it says, oh, she feels stuck. Okay, she feels bad about herself. Oh, she's probably not strong enough, and we might need to play dead right now so that this predator can't get her. She's feeling stuck, she's feeling attacked, she's feeling, and so what does it do? It just does what it's programmed to do, and you start realizing, oh gosh, I'm sending these messages to my body, and this isn't what I want. I'm just feeling this way, but gosh, my head isn't just in a jar. It's connected to every single cell in my body, and my body's just designed to respond in these certain ways. When you can make that connection between the conflict you're actively engaging in, the feelings that you're having, and the message that's communicating, and you can say, oh, that is it. That's self-devaluation. That is a separation conflict. That is that is that conflict. And I'm doing it right here, right now. That aha moment.
Isn't that interesting?
It's like, oh gosh, that's so interesting. I've never seen it in that way before. And just that little glimmer of like, even if you just kind of get sucked right back into like experiencing severe pain because of your healing phase, like that little glimmer, that little bit of like seeing those connections, that's what it's going to take. And if you've done it once, you can do it again, and it will grow and grow and grow. But yeah, it's like that's what it's going to take in that moment.
It's recognizing that, and I think too, it's having sort of what you might call it grace with yourself, or giving yourself kind of a grace period that lasts your whole life for figuring this stuff out, where you just sort of say, apparently, and this is not like a hard concept to kind of wrap your head around, right? Because we can see this in other people. Apparently, it's possible for people to do things without recognizing that they're doing them, right? And this is this whole like rotating the camera, like we're in Super Mario 64. We want to turn it around so that we can see what's going on. If it weren't possible for me to do things without realizing realizing that I was doing them. I probably wouldn't ever do things that didn't serve me. And I know I've spent most of my life probably doing things in one way or another that didn't serve me. And what that means is that in the moments that I'm doing those things, and in the moments that lead up to my doing those things, obviously I am doing the steps, right, that make this thing that's called doing what doesn't serve me, seeing impossibility, whatever. I'm doing those things without realizing that's what I'm doing. I'm signing up for something without knowing that's what I'm signing up for. Have you ever signed up for something because you wanted to get something that had your attention, you were distracted by it, and then you got a whole lot of what you didn't want instead, whether it was a bunch of emails?
It's like Michael Scott signing up for the...
Oh my God, yeah, right. Yes. Have you ever seen the episode of The Office where Michael Scott wants to show off and give like a big donation to one of his employees, has like a walkathon? He doesn't know it's a walkathon where it's by mile, and so everyone's giving like $2 or $3. He's like, man, this isn't very much. He's like, oh, I'm going to give $25, thinking that's all he's going to give, but he actually ends up, it's like $900 because it's $25 per mile. You sign up for things without realizing what you're signing up for. It's possible to sign up for a whole lot of stuff that you don't want. When you mentioned the awareness challenge, and just because I think probably a lot of the people who are watching this are doing or have done or will do in the future, the awareness challenge, that whole, I'm seeing all these thoughts, what do I need to do with them? It's like kind of herding cats or whatever. It's almost sometimes like playing tag. It's like, oh, I saw the thought, now I've got to go chase it. But really, it's more like, and I don't know what the name of this is, but is it flashlight tag or nighttime tag? You know this game like with the flashlights where you basically just have to shine the light on the person and they're out? That's what this awareness challenge is all about, is that you just see the thought. If you see the thought, you're done with it. You don't have to then do something in particular with it. Now, over time, as you get more and more skilled with seeing the thoughts, you will begin to naturally respond by handling them in certain ways, but you don't need to contrive or plan that. You just need to watch. And very often, the thing that prevents people from doing what works is that they do what works, and then they don't have anything to do after that. So like they watch the thought, and then they feel like they're not doing enough, and so they stop doing the thing that actually is enough, and then of course they're not doing enough, which is just kind of an example of how our focus tends to work. If I'm focused on not doing enough, it's possible that I will have been doing enough, but then I'll get discouraged or frustrated and then stop doing what would be enough if I would just keep doing it. But I can't keep doing it because I keep telling myself it's not enough, and I keep seeing not enoughness because my brain is calibrated to it. And how do I know what's not enough? Well, I just look at whatever it is I'm doing and have done and feel capable of doing in the future, and I know that's not enough. And when you see that, though, you can begin to let that go because you'll see the logical consequences. This is the whole awareness thing. When I see the logical consequences of doing what I'm doing the way I'm doing it, I begin to understand what it is I am signing up for each and every moment of my life, what it is that I am choosing. And this is this notion that when I'm choosing consciously, I tend to choose what serves me. When I'm signing contracts, when I'm making decisions, and I'm conscious of what those decisions are and what they're going to mean for me and what I'm going to get down the road, and what this decision is going to make it easy to make in the future, then I start making those decisions with that stuff in mind, and I start naturally doing what serves me. And so don't worry about chasing them down. Don't worry about changing them. Get good at watching them. Get good at seeing them. And then just notice what you see, and notice how you're inclined to respond and react to what you see. And notice that, because it's this active and ongoing thing, and the most relevant element of our creative process. This is one of these things we've been saying a lot lately, that I am not what's true to me or for me right now. Not my health condition, not my financial condition. I'm not even the thoughts that I'm thinking. I am my response to those things. And so if I think, God, so-and-so is a real jerk, and I'll see that, if I identify with that, I'm going to feel bad, which is a more present moment thing, right? I'm feeling bad about something I did. So the real problem is what I'm doing, which is feeling bad about something I just did. It's hard to keep up with this present moment in the beginning. I am my response to those things. So if I think to myself, God, so-and-so is such a jerk, and then I see that as a thought that doesn't serve me, and I say, man, did that improve what it's like to be me or not really? Do I want to see them that way or not? Does it improve my experience to see them in that way? Am I responding resource? That is a resourceful response. I become that response to the me I just was. You know what I'm saying? And I think the me that I am really is a consequence of how resourcefully I respond to the me I just was, or to the me I was just aware of being. Mm-hmm. And when you recognize that, you really free yourself to respond resourcefully. You free yourself to do what works rather than kind of obligating yourself to do what doesn't, because it's always what you've always done before. And then things really start to rapidly improve. So just to kind of like recap this whole thing, when something outside of me seems impossible, or something I'm dealing with. Like, for example, I've got like nested conflicts and it's a big kind of tight ball, and I feel like I can't get out of this thing. What we begin to do then is we say, okay, that impossibility is a result of the state that I'm presently in. It seems impossible to me because, in fact, it is impossible given my present state. And it's one of those things too. I can't do it doing what I've done so far. And because what I've done so far is the only thing I've ever done, I assume that the thing that I want to do, I can't do. And, it's interesting. I can't do it given what I've done so far, given what I'm doing right now. If I have no reference point for doing things other than the way I'm doing them right now, do you see how I can't do it given... I can't do it while doing the things I'm doing right now becomes the same as I can't do it at all, because it never occurs to me to do things differently if I've never done them differently before, or if I don't have permission to do them differently, or if I don't even know I'm doing them because I'm doing them outside of awareness. So recognize that the impossibility is an experience. It's not a fact of reality. And what we do is that we, rather than trying to do the impossible, rather than going to work on the impossible project of extricating ourselves from this negative experience, or diffusing these conflicts, or changing our thoughts, or making money, or whatever the impossible thing seems to be, rather than attempting to do the impossible, I first want to make the impossible possible by deconstructing my perception and experience of its impossibility. And you can play that again if you want to kind of really let it kind of pone it. But what I'm going to literally look at something that's impossible, and rather than trying to convince myself this thing that seems so crushingly impossible actually is possible, rather than trying to deny myself, because that's this whole denial and delusion and all this, what I'm going to say is, this looks impossible because it is impossible given my interactions with it presently, given the way that I'm seeing it, given the way that I am touching it with my consciousness and with my awareness. And so what I'm going to do is, I'm not going to go to work on this project that I'm seeing right now. I'm going to transform this project by changing my perception and my experience of it very deliberately. I'm going to say, listen, it is impossible. I'm seeing it as impossible. I don't like this reality. I don't like this internal experience. I'm just not going to work with it. I'm going to change it. This is what I do in my work with people, is I decide very consciously who I'm going to work with and in what capacity and for how long and all this different stuff, because I look at it and I say, can I work with this as it is right now? Can I help this person as they are, as I am in this moment in time? And if the answer to that is no, I say, well, not for now. No for now, maybe later. Do you know what I mean? And then you see someone else and it's perfect and you go for it. So we want to just change that. Don't do the impossible. Make the impossible possible by finding a way to recognize within it that possibility, by deconstructing the perception, the experience of impossibility that you're creating. Because this is one of those things for me, if I can do what doesn't serve me, I can do what can. If I can see something I want to do as impossible, that doesn't take any less work or any more work than seeing the things that I want to do as possible. It's just a matter of which switches do I need to flip? What mental money do I need to move around from this account to that account? I can't do it the way things are, but things don't have to be the way things are. I can change the way things are, and then suddenly I can do this thing outside. And I think one of the things about this is that we forget that we ourselves are a part of and not apart from the reality out here that we want to change. I tend to push things out from me and say, oh, here's my experience, and I can't do it. My experience won't change. I can't get it to be different than it is. But I see this thing, and so this holds my attention. So I'm the subject, and this is the object. I tend to overlook the subject, myself. I tend to overlook the voice that's saying, I can't change this experience. I see the experience, or I see the reality that corresponds to the experience, but I tend to be oblivious or unaware of the part of me that's looking at it, talking about it, telling myself stories about it, assigning meanings to it. And if I will pay attention to that part, begin to change reality from within, because within is a part of the reality that I'm wanting to change. And in many respects, reality out here is responding to, or is even a projection of, reality that's inside. It's kind of like a projector, what's on the screen is a manifestation of what's going on within the projector. But everyone sitting in the theater is looking at the screen, and they're so interested in the screen that they forget the projector's even there. Let alone, if something goes wrong on the screen and it's flickering or something like that, most people won't think, oh, look, I guess in the theater, most people would say to the guy at the projector, listen, do something different, the screen's not right. But in real life, when we see this stuff, whatever is holding my attention tends to hold my attention and tends to distract my attention from the fact that my attention is doing what it's doing. If I can start to become aware of what I'm aware of, and I can start to notice what I'm noticing, and I can start to look at what noticing in that way is made out of, I can start changing the things that I'm aware of and the things that I'm noticing. And that begins to change the projection of what I'm looking at. You'll actually see your problem fall apart and reassemble itself as a project. I mean, everything about it will begin to change, and you'll start interacting with it in a way that serves you, in a way that's resourceful, and it doesn't require. Don't wait for something outside or inside to change, to have this thing change, to become conscious of something different. Because a lot of the times it's just the awareness of the possibility of this that sets the whole thing in motion. A lot of the time it's that willingness to ponder, oh wow, maybe that's all that has to happen. Maybe I just step back from this. Do I need to get a little bit of distance from this? And you begin to see it in a different way. Or maybe you see it in the same way, but you see yourself seeing it in that same old way. And you see how seeing yourself see it in the same old way is very useful, but seeing it in the same old way isn't. And you see exactly what about seeing it in the same old way isn't useful. And you start thinking, oh, wow, that's a doing. And it's a doing I didn't realize I was doing. It was a happening back when I wasn't aware that I was doing it. But now that I am aware that I'm doing it, it becomes very much a doing. And once I know I'm doing something, I know I can do something different. And once I know how I do something, I know exactly how I can go about doing it differently. Kind of like an example of this is like, let's say I said to you, in order to create the life you want, you need to type this 50,000 word essay. And I know a thing or two about typing 50,000 word essays because I do it twice a morning. And let's say, okay, I say to you, all you got to do to solve your problems, get everything you want, is you just got to copy, like transcribe this with this essay. I want you just to retype this whole thing. And your hand, that's a doable task, right? That's an accomplishable thing. But let's say that your hands are handcuffed behind your back. Right? And that makes it very difficult. Now, if I try to type the essay with my hands handcuffed behind my back, I'm probably going to become so frustrated and create so much pain for myself and move at such a slow, agonizing, excruciating pace. I'm going to say, I can't do this. I can't do this. And what I'm saying is I can't do this as I am. I can't do this given certain disadvantageous and entirely changeable conditions from which I'm currently operating. Given that I have my hands tied behind my back, I can't do this thing. Let's untie your hands. You know what I'm saying? Let's find the key, get the handcuffs off, which is let's find those patterns of thinking and perceiving and experiencing that are constraining you in such a way that's causing you to experience this project as an insoluble problem. You know what I mean? And then your hands are free. And then it really is just a matter of da-da-da-da-da-da. You know what I'm saying? And you can type it out, no problem. But it's looking at how have my kind of habitual patterns of thinking and perceiving and responding to my thoughts and perception, how does my tendency to go unconscious and not be aware of what I'm doing, and how does my tendency to respond to things when I become aware that I'm doing them, resistance, blame, guilt, shame, meaning assignments that aren't serving me, bad stories that don't really feel good to tell myself, how are those things tying my mental hands behind my back and preventing me from kind of like recoding my experience, rewriting my experience, you know? Because I mean, if I were playing Super Mario 64 and I were playing it like it was a two-dimensional game when it's a three-dimensional game, I would never get anywhere. Because like in the very beginning, it's like there's this castle that you got to walk forward, away from the screen. You got to walk into the world in order to go to it. And if I'm in like super like 2D land, all I can do is walk left and right. I'm never going to get inside that castle. I'm never going to approach that door that I need to get to in order to advance in this game. If I'm acting like I'm constrained to two dimensions, because I'm feeling like I'm constrained to two dimensions, because nobody has explained to me that there's a third dimension to this whole thing. I need to start walking toward what I want, right? Instead of just away from things that I don't. Recognize my ability to kind of make movements inside. And I think that's kind of like the third dimension is, okay, how am I perceiving this reality? How am I experiencing this reality? In a way that doesn't serve me. Okay, well, I'm trying to change my perception. I'm trying to change my experience, but I can't. Well, okay, how are you perceiving your perception? How are you experiencing your experience? What's going on there? There's always this other dimension to go into. And it's learning about when you feel blocked and you feel frustrated and you feel tied down, you ask yourself, where's the other dimension? Because I can't move forward here. The door is locked. I have nowhere to go. Do I sit down and kind of, create inside myself frustration and futility and say this game is unwinnable? Or do I say there's a dimension here that I'm not aware of? There is something that I could be doing that I haven't discovered yet, and that's fine. See, that's a resourceful response. There's something that I could know that I don't, and that's okay. That creates a receptive mode where that knowing can kind of come in. There's always another dimension. It's just finding that dimension, finding that degree of freedom, finding that flexibility. I didn't know my mind would bend that way. Do you know what I mean? It's like you've seen these things of these octopi or these squid that can like get through little tiny tubes that are like this big, or they can like squeeze through, like they'll climb out. It's because they don't know what they can't do. Nobody told an octopus that it couldn't flatten itself into a sheet, or no one said to the octopus, you can't crawl out of it. Oh, there's no fish in your tank? Don't worry about it. Just crawl out of it, walk down the hallway, open the door, go into the other fish tank, eat the fish, then go back to your place and act like you were never gone. It is unconstrained, and it just does all the things it's capable of. And I think that our mind is kind of like that in a sense, or I guess our brain's kind of squishy like an octopus, but our mind is even more nimble than that. But it's about recognizing that it can do all sorts of things it's never done. Before we did this video, it's funny, my legs are kind of shaking right now because I did some intense stretching before we came in to do this video. And I did things that, in the past I'd never done before, that I guarantee you no one in the history of my family, possibly my whole genetic lineage, has ever done these stretches before, despite the fact that any of them could have done it. Like I guarantee you that my grandmother has never, ever, ever, one particular grandmother I'm thinking about, has never done any of these stretches that I've done this morning, and yet she could have. And I can guarantee you I've thought a number of thoughts this morning that no one in my family has ever thought before. A lot of thoughts about thinking. Nobody in the history of my family has ever talked to anybody about this kind of stuff before. Is it because their minds weren't capable of it, or is it because it just didn't occur to them? So what are you not doing that would solve your problem by turning your problem into a project? What are you not doing that you could be doing simply because it hasn't occurred to you yet? You know what I mean? And when you start recognizing that, stuff just kind of starts to fall away. All the fake stuff, all the obstacles, all the impediments, all of those things, when you relax, it's like when you relax and you stop resisting, it's like the wall of your awareness, or the membrane around your awareness, it relaxes, and things that aren't serving you float into awareness, and you just see them, and then you just dispatch them. You just sort of say, nah, don't think so. That's interesting. I'm doing that. You've had these moments before, right? Where you were doing something you didn't know and someone called it to your attention, and it was maybe something you would have been miffed or mad or embarrassed or guilty or ashamed of, but it was just so funny. It was just so funny that you couldn't help but laugh about it. It's just kind of like, well, damn, I guess I was doing that. I really didn't think I was making Melissa out to be worse than she was so that I could be more justified in a negative experience that I'm having that actually has nothing to do with her. But I just caught myself doing it, and I can't uncatch myself. I can't not see or unsee what it is that I've just seen, and I don't really want to. And you just kind of laugh, and then you learn something, and then you just sort of move on. It's kind of like that. And so it's creating that environment within yourself that will allow you to begin to express things, that will allow you to begin to build tremendous confidence in your ability to change. And you start depersonalizing your problems, and you even start depersonalizing your skills and your ability, because you just say, well, it's just kind of a part of having a brain and having a mind and having a body in this universe is that you can do really wonderful, amazing things. It's just, it's not me. It's just the way it works. You know what I'm saying? And when you recognize that, you start easing into a whole lot of what you want.
Yes, I think that grace period, that you give yourself for the rest of your life, give yourself time. Give yourself time because this is that is the thing about the methods, the things that we teach. It's a lifelong fix, but it's not necessarily a quick fix. It takes time to marinate your mind in these ideas. So don't take score too soon. Give yourself credit, because you are definitely doing way better than you think you are. And just keep watching, keep absorbing this information. I know you're the person who asked this question is in the Resolve program. Watch the videos and then just keep watching them, because the more you just let them sink in, they don't sink in the first time. I mean, none of this stuff sunk in the first time for me. Even in the first several months and years, it took time. And I don't want you to think that, oh my gosh, it's going to take forever. That's not necessarily true. Because the thing is I think that the way that Steve and I explain things, we kind of cut that learning curve, but there is an experiential thing where it's going to be words and ideas and, stuff until it's like an experience for you. And so that's why we try to help you through the exercises in Resolve, through the journaling, to get to that point where it makes, you've got an experience that you can look back on. Like I said, just one little project, one invitation that you responded differently to, and just build from that. And just, look at that experience of impossibility that you're creating for yourself. How am I doing this? What am I telling myself? Am I looking at this like a huge, it's like the whole, you've seen a million little quotes like this. It's a mountain, but you just take one step at a time. Or like, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. It really is like that. And when the elephant's really big, when the mountain's really big, when you've got all of these conflicts and, they're all tangled up together, and it seems impossible, you just start small. You start where you are. You give yourself that grace. You say, I am where I am, and that is where I am, and I'm going to, watch this experience, see how I'm creating it, pay attention to how I'm responding, and I'm going to use the tools, and I'm going to practice. And that willingness, I think, is huge for that, for that tendency to want to throw in the towel or to think that this is impossible or that it's just not going to happen for you because things just happen to be so bad. Just that willingness to engage with the clay and like say, instead of saying this mountain of clay, it's too big. Just get your hands on it. Be willing to work with where you are. And, that's really the biggest thing to getting to where you want to go.
And you can also walk around the mountain. You can also take a helicopter to the top of the mountain. You can also blast a hole through the middle so that you can drive a train to there's all these different wonderful things, and it really is, it's thinking like that for me. It's like, that's pretty fun. Yeah, you be innovative and engineer new things. And that's, I'm constantly like, and that's that people who create wonderful things is that they look at stuff and they say, how could that be better? Things that most everyone else has gotten accustomed to. And that's one of the huge obstacles is that we've gotten accustomed to being unhappy. We've gotten accustomed to dealing with a feeling of impossibility. And because we've just adjusted ourselves to it, we haven't deconstructed it. And so there is this kind of like become determined to create better at every level of experience, because one of those things we talked in the beginning about frustration or about expectation and disappointment, that happens a lot of the times when a person fixates at one level of experience, somebody else's behavior, some aspect of their external reality, some aspect of their situations or circumstances or relationships, and they become determined to create a different result there, but they neglect the other aspects of their experience, their perception of that thing, their experience of that thing, their behaviors, their responses to it, that they're focusing on it, what they're thinking about, how they're thinking about it. And it's when we take the determination that is sort of stifled and it's not productive when confined to one area of life, and we generalize that determination to all areas of life, so that when I say, I want to create a certain outcome, I want to change how I feel about this, I want to change the results that I'm getting, and I've got a whole bunch of different levels, just like dimensions in Super Mario, right, in which I can operate in order to create that thing. And sometimes there's a dead end here. I remember that in like some of those games, was that like, you go and there'd be a door with a lock on it, and you have to go way back to another world or another realm or another level, and you'd have to do something to get a key, and then you could bring it. Man, it's like Mario always had those like super like body-sized keys that he would carry around. You got to go somewhere else sometimes to find the key to that different thing. And so just as an ending, I wanted to quote some specific things that from this person's message. One thing they said, I'm so disappointed, kind of like a sad kind of emoji face. Let it be okay. That's fine. That's not a problem. We can work with that too. Everything is work withable, and that's important. The situations work withable. How you feel about the situations work withable. How you feel about the situation, that's work withable too. And you'll find that this stuff starts changing when you recognize, when you start saying, okay, what can I do about this versus, oh no, now I can't, or something like that, because we keep waiting for something we can't do anything about. And the reality is that thing never comes. There's always something we can do about that stuff. And when we recognize that, we tend to find what that thing is very quickly. It's like what you said, I am where I am, and where I am is where I am. And accepting where I am literally begins the process of changing it. Accepting where I am is sort of like building the launch pad from which I can launch to where I want to be. Now, you do have to launch. You do have to keep going. It's not that acceptance is all there is, but it is the beginning. It's the thing that makes the rest possible. And the person said, this is very complex. It is. That's not a problem. That's okay. Complexity really is when you learn these patterns, right? And a lot of what we're talking about here, it's unconscious learning or other than conscious learning. And if the conscious mind tries to like take notes on all this stuff, you're just gonna kind of like glitch out. You just kind of have to. This is the thing, is that what we're talking about is happening. That's important to recognize. The things that we talk about, we are doing those things right now in the way we're responding to you, in the way that we're sharing this information with you, in the way we're processing our internal experience. What is being talked about is occurring at all times. And so for me, one of the big things about learning is learning to not get too fixated on what's being talked about and learning to watch what's happening. What did he just do there? He just took something that was true for me and told me it wasn't a problem and explained how it could actually be an advantage. Someone posted something really interesting here about, I think it was, where where is it? Maria, something really great. She used to look at her, she had an abusive relationship she used to be in, and she was deciding that she was weak and naive. But what she's begun to learn is that she wasn't weak. She was really strong to get out of it, right? So that's a change in meaning assignment. That's a very powerful thing. This stuff is happening. I see in your language there very powerful patterns that when you generalize those things, and I think you're already doing it, Maria, to every area of your life, what you'll start saying is, I used to think this, but now I think this. I've changed the meaning, and it's completely changed my experience of whatever it was, and that's changing my behavior, and that's changing my results. Watch that. Oh, that's interesting. How can I change meanings to change my experience, to change my behavior, to change my results? That I can do that in anything. That's a very powerful thing. And so watch that and pay attention to that. And that was when I really took off with this stuff, was when I started, instead of taking notes on what people were telling me, I started modeling them. I started saying, and I just listened over and over and over and over again. And I noticed that my brain began to make these connections. Complexity is made out of reducible patterns. It's sort of like, if you ever listen to, I like the Goldberg Variations, and it's this classical music piece by Bach. And it's basically it's very impressive and very complex and very rich and very textured and all these different things on the harpsichord or the piano. But it is made out of the same basic little chunks of music. It's made out of the same basic little units of musical stuff. Do you know what I'm saying? And so when you learn to recognize the patterns, you'll hear us go blah, 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 and da, 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 and you'll start saying, oh, that story, that's just an example of utilization. Oh, Maria, what she was talking about, that's just a meaning assignment thing. That's what she did. I mean, it's a very huge thing. Oh, that's an example of resourceful focusing. Oh, that's an example of saying, oh, that thing you think is a problem. If you take that, what was it? Thought it was weakness and being naive, but it was actually, where is it? A good heart, and see the best in people. So you can see how if you did that same behavior in a different context, that's a source of immense enrichment for your life and the lives of other people. Same behavior, different context, radically different outcome, right? Same situation, different meaning, radically different experience. We create different outcomes. I can do that anywhere. I don't have to have a health problem. And so when you begin to recognize complexity as kind of an elegant weaving together of understandable, learnable, work withable parts, you stop being overwhelmed by the big thing and you start saying, what's that made out of? Here's a unit, here's a chunk. Ooh, look at all the different ways they can link those things together. Oh, that's interesting. Then you can start doing this stuff for yourself, And I mean, it's great when people watch our videos, but it's really wonderful when they start describing doing this stuff for themselves. Usually people, oh, I feel better after I watch your videos. And then they say, I feel better after I do the things that I learned from watching your videos. Like, oh, that's great, because now it belongs to you. And that's really when it becomes powerful. And then the last thing she said, I'm so disappointed, totally okay. And changeable. This is very complex. That's true, but complexity is not a problem because your mind is geared to work with complex things. If this weren't complex, it probably wouldn't hold your interest long enough. It wouldn't be enough fodder for your mental mind, for your mind to chew on. And then he said, and I can't break the cycle. Well, not now. I can't break the cycle thinking I can't break the cycle. And I can't break the cycle with my hands tied behind my back. And I can't win the 3D game with the 2D mentality. Do you know what I'm saying? And it's not just you. No one can do that. And so that's okay. The fact that you are experiencing yourself as incapable of breaking the cycle is not a problem. And it doesn't mean that you actually can't. See, that's really nice. That creates a kind of a new environment. And it's in that place, in that awareness and that knowing, that's when you'll begin to see the things that'll make it so that you can. It'll change you, change your consciousness in a way that will allow you not only to break the cycle, but what you'll do is you'll replace it with something else and you'll crowd it out with something else. Because very often I don't have to solve a problem. I just have to crowd that problem out of my experience with patterns of resourceful response to it. Does that make sense? You don't have to solve the problem. You crowd the problem out of your life with your resourceful responses to the problem and to your perceived inability to change it. Just do what you can do. It's enough, because doing what you can do makes it so that you can do more. Do you know what I'm saying? And like your experience in your life literally begins to extrude all of this stuff. If you can't climb the mountain, we can find a way around it, or we can find a path or a tunnel or something, or somebody's got a helicopter and we'll just fly you over. Don't worry about it. Either it's solvable or you don't need to solve it. That's it. And so then you just start watching and paying attention to it. And perhaps the solution to the problem is realizing that we don't actually have to solve it, that we can do other things instead. We can build something in front of this problem that makes it not a problem, because we can reroute you around to somewhere else. So infinite optionality. When you're feeling overwhelmed, you're overwhelmed by possibility, not by things that you have to do that you can't.
Absolutely. So I hope you guys found this helpful. Everyone, if you want more of this type of thinking, more of this type of work, that's what we do in the Resolve program. We have a whole monthly program where we go through different ways of thinking about your conflicts so that they're easier to resolve, so we can find these tunnels and these helicopters to get around and over things that seem like insurmountable problems by taking them apart, by making them projects so that they are easier for you to go to work on, and so that you don't keep, living in these same cycles, having these same patterns. And then if you want like the deep inner mental work, we also have the Ever Better Life course where we kind of teach you our model for understanding reality. The combination of that is the inner circle. So if you're a coach or a teacher and you want to learn how to teach this stuff to people and help them connect the dots, there's the inner circle for that. And so you can reach out to us. We also do personal coaching for mindset, for healing. And yeah, we just want to be here for you guys to help you in any way that you need. So have a great weekend, and we'll see you later.